Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. This week's guest is Allen Stevenson, another revert on the show, which is fantastic. I cannot wait to get into his story. Allen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Eddie, for having me.
I appreciate you very much. So, as a former Cradle Catholic, I always have trouble explaining that in my own journey. How did your faith journey begin?
So I was baptized Catholic. My mom's side was Catholic from the Midwest, from Des Moines, Iowa, and a government job landed them in the northern DC, Virginia area, where my mom met my Southern Baptist dad. Um, and his family wasn't like deeply involved in church, so there wasn't really that much protest to them getting married in the Catholic Church. Like my dad signed a thing. Actually, I had my mom out to lunch or dinner today, and we kind of talked about it. Um, he signed something that said he'd be fine with us being raised Catholic. I was baptized, but most of my like upbringing was in the Catholic Church, but without my father. So like my mom would take me, my grandmother, who passed in December, um, and I are the only Catholics left in the family. Um, and I got all my sacraments and I went to CCD, in the uh, early 2000s. I was born in 93, so I'll be 32 on Wednesday. Um, but yeah, so that was the upbringing. I mean, church was a Sunday obligation. It wasn't something that we really like lived out. Like there's no crucifix in my house. Like,
Okay.
we had a Bible. We had like a family Bible. But we didn't really do anything with it.
What about friends that from early, elementary years? Did you hang out with any other Catholics? A lot of
Yeah, I
Protestants?
went I went to youth group and stuff, in my church, but it was more like having fun. I think that like faith for me, it's weird that I didn't really recognize that there were other people that weren't Catholics until like maybe middle or high school. Like it was interesting. A few people would like invite me to church and stuff like that. I remember like going to a friend's church in like eighth grade. It was a Methodist church, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like this communion's a little different, you know. Like, oh, they don't have a priest here, they have like a pastor and stuff. So I started seeing like some differences there, but it wasn't like I Catholicism is all I knew, and I was, yeah, that was it
It's
for
all you knew.
early.
What would you say about your relationship with God during those years?
I think my relationship was okay. I feel like I was like kind of like going through the motions because that's what like my parents were doing. I definitely didn't have a very deep faith. Um, I would say that I was the definition of like poorly catechized.
Hmm.
Um, uh, it as I got deeper in my faith in my adult life, I think that's what more defined where I'm at today.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I stopped attending church when I was 18. I was like, okay, I'm, out working and I don't have time for that kind of deal. Um, and it just seemed like it was kind of like on the back burner, like I'll get to it one day when I'm like married and have kids and stuff. But I still, I joined the Navy. And they asked me what religion I was, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, like Roman Catholic, and they put RC on my dog tags, and that was great. So, and in boot camp, you get off for like a couple hours to go to church. So I went to mass like every Sunday. It was actually really good. It was the first time I've been to mass in a few years. And I thought, I think I'm gonna do this. Like I think I'm gonna take my faith more seriously and get be more Catholic.
What if you remember what would prompt that in the middle of boot camp?
I think it was just that there was a lot of like new things, and the Catholic Church and like mass and stuff was something I knew and I recognized. Like it was like something that, was home and familiar, and that it was a sense of comfort, And I mean, we prayed a lot in boot camp, but it was interesting because it was like the chaplain that would come in was like a Protestant chaplain.
Sure.
Um, and I felt that, I don't know, that I wasn't really growing from that. So I went to mass and I was like, okay, like I'm, taking the Eucharist and stuff like that, which I probably shouldn't have because they didn't do confessions. But um, yeah, so I was in the Navy, and when I was deployed, we had an amazing Catholic chaplain on board. His name was Lieutenant Commander Dermott. Really amazing. Father Dermott was really great, and we were in an extended deployment. We were in the Middle Eastern area, and he was really amazing. I went to daily mass, went to confession, like, face to face. I never had a screen confession until I reverted. Um, and it was a really wonderful time that I grew in my faith a lot. We were very close. He helped me through a lot in like my deployment. Um, and then when we got back, it was about 2 weeks after we got back, he actually just tragically passed away. Um, so, it was out of the blue, like he was still stationed on our ship and stuff. And I got a text that was like, "Hey, Father Dermot like passed away in his home, and we're having this funeral on the ship and stuff." And yeah, it was really rough. And I think that I kind of like felt like my Catholic home was gone, and I really kind of left the faith at that point. I was probably 21 at the time.
Okay, so you were devout and you hear about his passing. Were you angry at the church, specifically angry at God, or just distracted by the grief and you just distanced yourself?
I think I was distracted by the grief for sure. It's still really tough, but
Yeah.
I I started looking into like, I don't know. I moved away from church a lot. Like it was like I didn't feel the same kind of comfort. Like I went to like a local parish that was in the Norfolk area where I was stationed in Virginia, and I just didn't feel like I was getting anything out of it. And at the time, I had some friends that were like evangelicals, and it seemed like they were like really feeling it. Like they were like really feeling this like Jesus moment, and like they would invite me. I'd be like, they were evangelizing me. They were like, "Hey, do you go to church?" I was like, "Oh, I'm Catholic. I don't really go to church or anything." They're like, "Oh yeah, come to ours. We have great music, great programs and stuff like that." So I floated around some like non-denominational evangelical churches and stuff like that. Um, and then I got out of the Navy, and I moved back home to the Northern Virginia area, and I met and married a girl that was not religious at all. She was I guess would be like agnostic, not
Yeah.
not like practicing. And church was totally on the back burner. Like it was not part of our life. Um, we had a daughter together, and that marriage ended in divorce. Um, and it was just like a very weird time for me. And I remember walking into a local non-denominational church, and everyone was so nice, and everybody was like, you know, it seemed like they really loved Jesus. And I said, I remember going, and they had like the altar call, and we're like, "Oh, like if you haven't accepted Jesus into your heart and stuff." And I was like, I feel like, I don't know, I want to re-accept Jesus. I want to like recommit my life to Jesus. So this seems like a good thing. Um, so I, you know, got saved at that point, as an evangelical. And this was like, a church in a high school. Like it was like a satellite to a local megachurch. Um, and I got really involved. I joined like a local men's group. That we prayed together. It was for like veterans and stuff. And I eventually started going to like their main campus. I got really into the Bible in small groups. I started becoming kind of like evangelical and like Baptist is so close, right? So it's like very similar beliefs. I started becoming like almost like an apologist of that faith. I was in like I think I still am in the in the church's video for like tithing. They have like I want to compare it to like OCIA, but they have um like a four horse thing where it's like how to join the church or whatever. And I'm in one of them. I think I'm still there. So like if you're going to this church, you'll see me talking about how you should tithe at the church. So it's interesting. But um during that, I'd gone through my divorce and stuff like that. I was living my single life. Um and I remember kind of like being on the fence on some beliefs like that. It was kind of like in the back of my mind. Like I remember being at a small group and we were doing a study on James and they were talking about like, oh, James is the brother of Jesus. And I remember turning to the leader and I was like, but Jesus didn't have any siblings. Like Mary was always virgin. And they were like, what? No, like that's not true. Like that's not like here, it's right in the Bible, like brothers and sisters of Jesus. And I was like, oh, I I didn't know that. I was poorly catechized. I didn't really have a good dogmatic understanding of Mary's sexual virginity. And it was like other things that were weird. I remember a friend asking me like, "Oh, are you pre-trib or post-trib?" Our church doesn't really have a stance, but like, are you pre-trib or post-trib? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, are you pre-tribulation on the rapture or post-trib? And I was like, I don't think that the rapture's real, is what I told them. And they were like, what? I was like, yeah, I really just don't think that it's a thing. And I use scripture to back it. And I was like, I think that the scriptural understanding of rapture isn't true. I don't think that there's enough scriptural backing it. And they kind of were like, okay, yeah, no, like you don't have to believe it, but like I think that it's good to, study these things kind of deal. And then I remember I kind of like I was asked, I was basically all my friends were non-denominational Christians. Like I had a big group of evangelical friends. We would talk about stuff like young earth and old earth, and I was like staunch old earth creationist, and some of the stuff that was like with Ken Ham and stuff like that with the ark and dinosaurs on the ark and stuff like that, that it kind of just like rubbed me the wrong way. And I was like, I don't know if I believe this. Like, I don't know if I like these things seem like they're so dogmatic to like evangelicals. And I know that that's not true. Like, I know that there's plenty of people that'll watch this and they're like, oh, we don't believe that. We're whatever. But in my circle, it was right. Like in my circle at the time, it was like kind of like you should probably be young earth because like the Bible's so literal. And I just kind of like pushed it to the side. I was like, well, I really love my church. I was volunteering. I was in the kids ministry. I was like one of the like the elementary leaders and stuff like that. Like my daughter was probably like 3 at the time. So I was like in the preschool class and I like kind of followed her into like the fours and fives and stuff. And I met my wife Emily through like a Christian dating app because I was like, I need to find a God-centered woman. And I met this wonderful woman who happened to live in Michigan. And we like met on this Christian dating app called Upward. And we uh we met. I didn't know she was in Michigan and I flew out there and then a month later I flew her back here and married her. Um but Emily's dad is a Baptist pastor. So, I came up there and we talked about faith and stuff and I told him some of the stuff like the old earth creationist stuff. And he was like, oh, if you believe, that's fine, whatever, like you're saved. So it is what it is kind of deal. He's like, I feel like we could talk for a while about young earth and you'd probably change your mind, but it's fine. So, my wife moved here and we were married and she decided she wanted to get really involved in the church too. And so we were, volunteering and stuff. And for some reason we kept leaving. Like we kept leaving the evangelical like megachurch we went to kind of look for something deeper, but like kind of in the same space. Like we went to a like another megachurch, but they were a like a Calvary chapel, so they
Hmm.
went like verse by verse through the Bible, and I thought that that was really interesting because I love history. Like I've always been like a huge like history buff. Um, my grandfather was like really big into the Civil War and World War II and stuff, and so I thought that that was a really cool place. But it was really far, so we ended up going back to the other church, and then we moved and we went to like a little home church, like a small family church that was another Calvary chapel. Um, they had really good worship and everybody was really nice and stuff like that. But we kept leaving these churches and going back to our first like mega church that we went to, and we were just like, okay, I feel like maybe this is just the best place because we just keep coming back here. And this was in like the summer. But no, this was last summer, like early last summer. And early last summer, we volunteered at our like vacation Bible school, and they had all the kids there, and we actually worked with a group that helps special needs kids. My brother has Down syndrome, so it's like a kind of like a personal mission for me. And so we were working with Open Arms, which is a ministry that helps parents of special needs kids. We're like a buddy for them and stuff like that. And we went to, I think it was the last day that we volunteered, and they had like people like, you know, I, I'm over embellishing by saying crowd surfing, but it was like basically like that kind of worship service with these kids. And we both left. We went to get food and we sat in the car eating our to go, and we were like, I don't think that this is what church should be. Like, I think that this is wrong. I don't know what about it feels wrong, but it feels like it's such like a commercialized thing. I don't think that this is right. And my wife at the time, I kind of thought the same things, but didn't say anything to me. Um, and so we we kind of thought, well, what are we going to do? So we prayed about it and thought about it and started reading the Bible. And we thought, well, there's such an emphasis on small groups because everything's like, you join the church, you get saved, you get baptized, and then they're like, okay, you need to volunteer and you need to join a small group. And the big pitch on small groups is it's like the early church. Like the early church was home churches, that's what we were told. And that's where, you really grow in your faith. So we thought, well, maybe we'll just do church at home. Like maybe we'll just look out what did early Christians do? See where I'm going. See what the early Christians did and try to do that. Because like I think that that's closer to this. And in the church we went to, they had a lot of like weird like financial decisions, like $2 million cameras and stuff like that. And we were like, I just don't feel like that's necessary. Um, so my wife, unbeknownst to me, was praying that like I just lead us in the right direction. Like as a man in our family, that I find, the path that works best for us. And she said, whatever denomination we go to, just let Alan lead our family in like a good way. And so I started digging, and I like didn't have Catholicism even in my mind. I wasn't looking at like Protestant versus Catholic arguments or anything. I was looking into like early church teachings. I was looking at why we believe certain things. I looked up like the origins of the rapture, when that came about, who first wrote about it. And I just kept getting more Catholic. It was like I think I have it here, but Ignatius. Um, Warning: if you start reading Ignatius, you'll probably be Catholic. So, I remember I didn't tell my wife because of the huge like anti-Catholic upbringing of her and her family. I was like, I'm gonna keep this Catholicism on the down low until I know for sure that's the direction I want to be in, and I know like that I'm not gonna change my mind. Like I don't want to like sell her on something and then like go back on it, and then we end up exactly where we are. Like that's not a good leader. Um, so I started digging and I bought some books on Amazon and stuff, and they were like vaguely Catholic, but they didn't say Catholic on them. Like they were like very like the early church history and like St. Ignatius of Antioch. But I think I just got like an Ignatius of Antioch with no saint on it, stuff like that. And I remember I was reading them and stuff like that. And my wife we weren't going to church at all at this point. Like I hadn't been to mass, like I hadn't talked to a priest or whatever. But I actually had emailed a priest and was like, "Hey, my wife is like Baptist. Like I want to come back to the church, but like I don't know how to tell her and stuff like that." And they were like trying to meet with me and stuff like that. But I felt like it was like kind of disingenuous to like meet with a priest if I hadn't talked to my wife first. So the story I'll tell is funny because it gets repeated in OCIA quite a bit because right now my wife's in OCIA. Oh wait, spoiler alert. Um, so we're laying in bed and we just kiss goodnight, and I'm like I turned over and I was like, "Good night, I love you," and she's like, "I love you," and I said, "I think I'm Catholic," and she was like, "What?" and turned on the light. It's like, "What do you mean you're Catholic?" I said, "No, I think that I'm Catholic," and she's like, "No, no, you're not Catholic." Then no, I really think that I am. I think that that's where I'm supposed to be. I think that's where our family's supposed to be. And she like just got up and started cleaning. Like she was like, "There's no way that my husband is Catholic. This is not happening. This is not like the direction that I want my life to go." Kind of deal. Um, she was like, throw those books away. Like, I know those books are like making you Catholic, so throw them away. And I did. I was like, okay, whatever. And I was like thinking in my mind, I was like, man, like, am I just like, I believe it though. Like, am I just gonna like, be like a non-denominational attending Catholic and like just like believe these things in my heart but not practice? Like, I feel like that's wrong. And I remember, we went back and forth on it quite a bit. Um, and we didn't really talk about it. Like, I wasn't going to mass and stuff like that. And then like maybe a few weeks later, I wanted to go to mass. And I didn't know at the time that when I would go to work, my wife stays home. She was watching Trent Horn. So she was like on Trent Horn and watching debates and then watching like the Protestant side of things. And she was like slowly getting like more okay with the idea of Catholicism, but not to the point of converting. So she said, I'd like to attend mass with you. I said, okay, cool, let's go. And I went, and of course, it was like what a new Catholic friend calls like a smells and bells mass. So like we went to a very traditional parish, or we still go there, and so it was like a lot of Latin, like Latin, Greek, and like incense and stuff. And I was like, oh no. Yeah, I remember like sitting next to her. I was like, oh no, like the Kyrie's in Latin or in Greek, and like Sanctus is in Latin, the Gloria is in Latin. Like she's gonna think this is crazy. But she actually really liked it. She thought it was very reverent, and beautiful. Um, and she wasn't like sold on it. She didn't believe all of the dogmatic stuff. She had a big problem with like the Marian dogmas and stuff. Um, but uh slowly but surely she decided she wanted to attend OCIA. Um, and I remember it was like actually the first mass that she attended. Her parents kind of knew that I was like, exploring the Catholic thing. And she was like, I need to tell my parents before I go to mass. And we were in the parking lot of the church. And she was like, hey, just so you know, Alan's Catholic and I'm going to go to mass with him. And it was like a huge blow up, like a huge blow up, like a call me right afterwards kind of deal. Um, and she, and her parents quickly devolved to like, it is okay to get a divorce because you didn't sign up for this. Like the very, very like, you'd think that, a pastor's family would be anti-divorce, but they were like very pro. Um, and my wife, it just didn't sit well with her. I think that honestly, if anybody evangelized her to Catholicism, it wasn't me. It was probably a mixture of Trent Horn and her parents. Um, and just kind of seeing, I had some conversations with her dad, like we talked about, baptism and stuff and, baptismal regeneration and stuff. And he just kind of had like these weird arguments for it. Um, and at the end of the day, it kind of was like, well, let's just agree to disagree. Like we can be like, very, you know, cordial and stuff like that. But it ended up um, kind of devolving to where we were kind of banned from their family,
Mm.
which really sucks. Um, but our faith is very strong, and my wife is still like learning a lot. She knows. She says she like she doesn't need to go to OCIA. They should just have like a thing that like a checkbox that you watch Trent Horn videos, like 50 Trent Horn videos, and then like if you did, then like that's fine. Like you can get confirmed.
Did you get counsel from Trent? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's kind of where we're at.
So when
We've
did that happen? When did you officially revert? Are we talking like the tail end of last year?
so this was the tail end of last year. So
Yeah.
we, probably in late summer of last year, um, I went to confession. I did my first confession on the way back, and that was before we had gone to mass together. I said I wanted to go to confession first. That was my first leap back into the faith was confession.
Yeah.
And I remember she was super supportive. Like she was like, make sure to tell him all your sins, Um, but she stayed out in the car and I went in and it was like very dark because it was like a later night confession. And I had a really wonderful confession to a priest I really respect. And I was ready to go back in. And I remember going back in, I was like, all right, now I gotta go to mass. And so that was the tail end of last year. And since then, it's just been a lot of like really cool signs that have happened in our life. Like, you know, especially for her, right? Emily's the one that even found your podcast to like be like, hey, you should reach out. Cause I was like, maybe I should start my own Catholic thing. And she's like, no, go, you need to go on this Catholic ReCon thing and talk about our story because it's pretty interesting. Um, and just some of the other stuff, like for example, like the Marian dogmas for her, right? She had a very hard time with some of the Marian dogmas because I think that's a lot of a barrier to entry for a lot of Protestants, right? Because they're told that Christ is the only mediator, which he is. So there's a misunderstanding of intercessory prayer and the body of Christ being both in heaven and on earth. Um, and she actually prayed to Mary, and she would say like she would pray and say, Mary, if you can hear me, kind of like this is okay, but also in Jesus' name kind of deal. She was like, I'm having some struggles and stuff about this, but can you just make it really obvious that this is the true path for me? And I remember we went to a Catholic bookstore because I wanted to buy some books, and she, at the time had been to mass, but no idea to convert yet. And I remember I was talking, and I get a military discount because I'm a veteran. And I showed him my ID, and there happened to be a priest there who's buying some stuff for the church. He's a pastor of a local church, and he was like, "Oh, what branch did you serve in?" And we went back and forth a little bit, and he asked, "Oh, are you Catholic?" And I was like, "Yeah." And and he asked my wife, and she said, "No, I'm not. I'm a Christian. My dad's a Baptist pastor, kind of deal. He's not very happy about this whole situation." And the priest said, "Hey, do you mind if I take you to lunch? There's a pizza spot next door. Let's grab a bite and let's just talk over some stuff." And we went over, and she just kind of grilled this priest. She was like, "What about Mary? And what about the Rosary? And what about the Pope? Like, what about Bishop Barron? Like he says some stuff that I don't agree with and stuff like that," because she had done some digging. And he gave her some really solid answers, and he prayed with us, and he gave us his phone number and stuff like that. And I did not know that she prayed for like a sign for some answers and stuff like that. But like we got in the car, and she was like, "Alan, I prayed like to Mary to like, help us get some answers, like help me like, you know, see some answers here and stuff like that." And it worked. So it was really cool. Um and I know the stuff like that happens all the time, but I think that, God will lead you, like the Holy Spirit will lead you where you're supposed to be. We've just seen like a lot of wonderful things for our family. But it's unfortunate that um my in-laws aren't a part of it because like my wife is pregnant right now with our first, and and that's something we struggle with for many years. So that just out of the blue happened. She had some like vaguely Catholic beliefs like that weren't in line with Protestantism. Like she believed like she was against IVF. When we were, going through like our fertility stuff, she was like, I don't ever want to do IVF and stuff. I feel like that's wrong. Even though, that's not a teaching from like the Baptist world. They're totally cool with
Yeah.
it. At least most of them are. I'm sure that there's individual people that are not. Um, but yeah, it ended up eventually where she wanted to go to OCIA, and then I went with her as her sponsor and stuff. And we have some barriers that are very difficult, I think, still for us because like we're not in communion with the church right now because we're not convalidated.
Oh, okay.
Um, but we both have to receive an annulment, and that is a process. And I've
Yeah.
watched tons of YouTubers talk about it. Um, it is not an easy process. It is not fun. Um, and yeah, it is a stumbling block for sure. For I feel like a lot of people that want to get back in the faith, they're
Yeah.
like, I'm Catholic and I believe this and I want to take the Eucharist because it is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, and I need it for the journey. And then it's like, well, you're not in communion with the church. So that it's definitely a stumbling block for a lot of, I think, people coming back into it that may have lived a life that was compatible with evangelical or non-denominational beliefs, but you get into the Catholic beliefs and they're like, well, these are the rules. So
Yeah.
I think that yeah. So
Yeah. Okay. There's so much. First of all, I gotta say, I sometimes it's I get into interview mode and I just kind of brushed over the fact that you lost that priest early on in your life. And so I'm
I
sorry for
did.
that. I am
Yeah.
sorry for that. That's a big part of your journey. And like you said, it was so devastating that it took you, you kind of distance yourself from the church, right? And then congratulations on the baby. Okay.
Thanks.
So that's
Right.
that's a blessing. I'm very sorry to hear about the family rift as a result. You read
Yeah.
about such things in the Bible, but that doesn't mean just because you find something that aligns with what you're dealing with, that doesn't mean that it's easy at all, right? You
Yeah.
guys are going through very heavy duty situation. There are a lot of people, as you mentioned, that are either on YouTube or people I've spoken to that have those same stumbling blocks. Yet, right, the church, in so many ways, even from a moral theology standpoint, very difficult picking up a cross. And I know that you already know this. I'm saying this to people that might be watching.
Yeah.
If you were to drill into a lot of different stories, you might find a stumbling block tied to, as you said, Marian teachings or just outright moral teachings that are so
Mhm.
difficult and you can't fathom it. And what the church is calling you to is so radical with the patience that it requires and the trust. I've been saying this to everyone, but you're going to have a lot of people praying for your family
Mhm.
in a very, I believe, very beautiful way to help you get through this chapter that has some remarkable signal graces, but also some barriers, as you were saying, to say the
Yeah.
least. Dang, what were you saying? You said tail end of the year, and it was
My first thing was confession.
the
That's the very first
confession.
thing I did.
Yeah.
And then we started going to mass. Yeah. And then OCIA,
Yep.
which has been a good experience. Our church is a really good OCIA.
You've been going to all the
Um,
classes with your wife. Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh,
I
that's
attend.
it was tied to that. So the catechesis that you didn't get in the 90s, did you feel as you were researching the early church that you picked up a lot of that, or is OCIA? I suppose I am answering my question. It's probably filling in the gaps that you weren't able to cover when you were researching the early church, right?
I feel like OCIA is, at least in my experience, kind of seeker sensitive. Like it gets deep, but there's a lot of I think it's tailored by design for people that have no experience with Christianity. Um, it's not because it's not all just the church. Um, there's a lot of like foundational stuff about like the Trinity and stuff. But if you come from like a Trinitarian, you know, non-denominational background, you're already there, right? Like
Sure.
you already get that stuff. I think that the best things that OCIA has done for us is like some of the question and answers, right? We've gotten some good answers, especially even not just from the priests and speakers and deacons, but some of the leaders, right? Some of the people that are converts that now volunteer their time, away from their families to come for one night a week. Um, and teach us stuff. A lot of them have really great stories. Like I mean, I had a question about guardian angels, right? Like I had the guardian angel prayer in a Bible, that I had when I was a kid and stuff like that, but I never really thought about my guardian angel, right? I didn't realize that that was a thing. I remember asking, well, when do we get them? Like, do I have to ask the guardian angel to like be with me, or like how does that work?
Yeah.
And I just remember our leader at the time, he was like, that's not how it works. You have this guardian angel. We all do, and we can, pray to our guardian angel and send our guardian angel to mass and all kinds of stuff. And I was like, oh wow, okay, like I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. Like I knew the early church stuff. Like we can talk about ecumenical councils all day long, and like early church heresies, but some of like the other parts of just practicing our faith and living a more liturgical life, which is like what we're trying to seek to do. That stuff has been reinforced. I've met some really awesome people, like the godfather and godmother of our our soon to not soon to be birth, she's very early, but our future child, as well as my daughter from my previous marriage. We met them through our parish, and they've been amazing, and have helped out a ton as far as just like questions and stuff that we've had to, that
Good.
we've had. I think that we've seen a lot of community, which, growing up, I didn't have as much of a strong like Catholic community, and I do now, which is really nice.
That's great to get you through all of this. Family aside, why, where do you think the anti-Catholic rhetoric comes from largely?
So I think that the anti-Catholic rhetoric has to do with, um, I think it's a multi-leveled question because you start at the Reformation and you see, and one of the things that, brought me another thing, because when I was looking, I wasn't looking for Catholicism, but to learn that like Martin Luther believed in like the perpetual virginity of Mary, that he believed in the real presence in the Eucharist, and that he believed in infant baptism, and that it was regenerative. I
Yeah.
was like, where did we lose this? Like, where, if even these reformers, like they believe this stuff and they were against the Catholic Church, then where did like American Protestantism is really one of the only areas you see stuff like that's like baptism is just a symbol, and stuff like that that Mary had other children and the rapture and all this other stuff. I was like, where did these new ideas kind of come from? And I think that I think a lot of it's cultural too. Because I think that, if you're raised in, especially like in a Bible Belt area, and you are, you brought up Baptist and stuff like that, there's a lot of like, um, you know, uh, ignorance, but not in a bad way, but like in an ignorance of like you haven't, you're so far in that it's hard to like
Yeah.
come out because you have so much like
Yeah.
preconceived notions, right?
Yeah. Makes
It
sense.
kind of took me totally disassembling my faith to end up Catholic, like totally disassembling every view that I had and like being very critical with it. I think that that's really hard to do, because when you believe and have faith, question everything, you have this fear that you're invalidating all your previous experience. Like, you have this fear that you're invalidating the answered prayers, and the times that God pulled you through things, because maybe the church wasn't right, but that's not true. God works outside the Catholic Church, and I think that that's it's a big thing. But you know, and I joke when we talk about her parents or whatever, but I'm like, hey, you know what? If they're in heaven, they're Catholic.
Mm,
Like when they die, go to heaven, they're Catholic because it's a body of Christ. So if they're not Catholic now, if they're in heaven, they're Catholic. Um, so I don't know. I think that yeah, it's cultural. It's again, you feel bad like kind of invalidating that stuff, but I think it's important to know that just because you revert or convert to a different denomination, it's really an experience of the fullness of truth. It doesn't mean that there was no truth in what you were doing. You know what I'm saying? Um,
yes,
with
totally.
certain barriers, right? Like there's certain like if you're an atheist, you can be like, oh, there was truth there. I feel like that's not the same thing.
No,
But
but it's a fair,
um,
yeah, I think it's a very fair, and I appreciate the answer very much. Very fair assessment, I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that a lot of it, I heard a quote. I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but to be a student of history is to be a Catholic. And I think that when you really look at stuff, even like from a completely, if you pull those biases away, I've had this conversation with, my in-laws recently that like I didn't want to be Catholic. Like that was nowhere on my radar of what I wanted to do, but it was true and I believed it. And so I had to go. I knew that I was called to it. Um, I think that there was some feeling from them that because I was raised Catholic,
Yep.
that I kind of went to what I knew, but what I'm experiencing now is nothing what I knew. The motions of going to mass and receiving the Eucharist and stuff like that, and going to confession once a year or whatever that I would do as in my youth. I did not have a deep faith at all, but my faith now is really strong. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And honestly, just on the interview, just through the interviews that I have done, how many people have said I didn't want to? In other words, there's absolutely no coercion. If you were to distill down their journey, you recognize they're having trouble surrendering to something they know is true. But how can it be true? I was told this is not biblical Christianity. It's not Bible believing. It's not this. It's not that. And lo and behold, the number of people, it just keeps climbing. I didn't want to. And then once I did, my world opened up in a way I didn't even think was possible.
I mean, I think that there's also a huge movement in my generation, that as we've seen like world events unfold and stuff like that, I'm a millennial, and I think that there's a lot of people looking for tradition. I think a lot of people are seeking more. I think that the evangelical movement has a place. I think that it's seeker sensitive for sure. It brings a lot of people into a church that have never been to a church or never heard about Jesus.
True.
And I think that there's a lot of good work. I've seen them clothe people and feed people and do things that, Jesus would want us to do.
Yes.
But I think that a lot of people, especially with the access of information that we have now, you're able to get Ignatius in a PDF for free and just read through it. I think that there's really like there's not a whole lot of excuse to not know. At least if you're going to reject the Catholic Church, there's enough resources that you can look to at least have like some sort of argument. Again, that's another thing. When I was going through, and not wanting to be Catholic, I was kind of looking at the arguments of it. I was like, well, the early church was Catholic. So when did the Catholic Church stop being right? So like, you look at like the Renaissance popes and stuff like that, and that's kind of like the argument that I thought made more sense. I was like, okay, well, maybe they turned away and that was, the Reformation happened and stuff like that, but then I never ended up where I was. Like where did this like American evangelicalism come from? Like it's not there's too much of a difference here. And as I went through and you read some of the stuff that came out of like the Council of Trent, like, the Counter Reformation, you're like, oh, wait, okay. Like, and all the members that were
Yeah.
added back to the church and stuff at that point. And just even like the, the early like Catholic and Protestant wars and the martyrs and stuff like that, you can kind of see that like the church has always been there. And though that there are sinners within the church itself is perfect. The church as an institution, as a magisterium that has apostolic succession is perfect, but the people are not. We're all sinners, right? And I think that the problem is when you hold everyone to the standard um, of Christ, everybody kind of falls short. We all will. So like, looking at some of like the Renaissance popes and stuff like that. I mean, I actually in OCI heard an amazing argument for some of the great things that Renaissance popes did, like preservation of art and artifacts and stuff like that. Like a lot of that stuff wouldn't be around
Yeah.
if it weren't for the Renaissance popes. So I mean, I think that that's but that was an argument that I was like kind of trying to use, but it just didn't hold water at the end of the day when it came to like I couldn't avoid Catholicism. It just happened. Yeah.
What else, Alan, would you like to add? This is very special when you're in the middle of it personally, because audience members that will come across this that could be in OCIA and they are even now on the fence, let's say. What would you like to add? Anything?
I think that the biggest thing is that you could enjoy your faith. I think that when you look at some of the barriers to entry, even like the annulment stuff and everything, not that they're barriers, but just that they are difficult for many. I think that you can like lose sight of the beauty of your faith, and that you can kind of feel kind of hopeless. Like you just like, I want to be Catholic, I want to be in communion with the church and stuff like that. But there's no barrier to you living a liturgical life that's centered around Christ, that allows you to experience the fullness of truth in like your everyday living. Like we're in Lent right now, and like, celebrating Lent, doing a novena, deepening your prayer life, all that stuff can be done by non-Catholics too. Like there's no rule that you have to be Catholic and in communion with the church to pray a rosary. But I can tell you that the rosary is a weapon and it's an amazing devotion for many. And I think that, if I remember when before my wife went to mass with me, I would at night pray a rosary in my head. I didn't know any of the mysteries. However, I knew the format and I would like count them on my hand, like so I could like keep track of my Hail Marys. And I prayed it every night until she wanted to go to mass with me. So I'm not no
That's great.
I don't know if that's the cause, but I think that there's a lot that, people that are in that OCIA process and stuff like that, you can do a lot to deepen your faith in that time period before you're in full communion with the church. And I remember when my wife kind of gave her testimony at OCIA, our deacon was like, "Oh, you'll probably be like one of the best Catholics of all of us." Like the fact that like you chose to come here from another denomination, you you see that it's the truth. That's really great. So I do think it's I don't know that every Catholic channel says, oh well, it's a fullness of truth, but it really is. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Fantastic, Alan. Um, yeah, give my best, and my wife doesn't even know your wife, but on behalf of my wife, give her
Sure.
our best, and we will be praying for you guys. This is a lot at once, especially when she's with child. I can only
Yeah,
imagine. Yeah,
it is. So keep us in your prayers. I appreciate it a lot, and I'm glad to come on here.
yeah.
Um, I don't have a cool channel to like shout out or anything, but I definitely wanted to. My deacon said he'll watch this when it's posted. So
That's beautiful. Yeah, I'll let you know when it comes out, and I can almost guarantee the timing will be, well, it'll be according to God's timing. I sometimes by the time I get around to certain things, I'm like it's going to
yeah,
be April, whatever. And sure enough, whoever that is, they're excited because they say that the date has some significance. So we'll
okay,
see. We'll see what
cool,
happens. We'll see what happens. Blessings to
awesome.
you, Alan. Thank you so much again for sharing all of that. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Eddie. I
Yeah.
hope it wasn't too much. I'm like, man, I don't know.
Are you kidding? No, this is great.
Okay,
Everyone,
sweet.
please, please, please like, comment, subscribe. Most importantly, if you know anyone that is discerning the faith, send them these videos and videos like these. And until next time, take care and God bless you. Bye.
Please do.